Waking up from my coma should have been the best day of my life. Finding my kids' group chat made it the worst. I woke up after 6 weeks to find my 3 adult kids standing around my hospital bed. They all looked exhausted and stressed instead of relieved. I figured they'd just been through hell. The next few days, my kids visited constantly. Sutton brought me magazines. Kellen helped me with physical therapy. Pierce sat with me during meals, but something felt off in a way I couldn't pinpoint. They seemed tense. They'd start conversations and then trail off. When I asked how they'd been holding up, they'd change the subject. The nurse told me one afternoon how devoted my children were. She said they'd been there every day asking about my condition. That made me feel better. They were probably just exhausted. When the doctor said I could go home in a few days, my kids all went quiet. Sutton said, "Are you sure you're ready?" Kellen said, "Maybe you should stay longer, just to be safe." I said I was fine and wanted to sleep in my own bed. Pierce said, "We should talk about what happens when you get home." I didn't understand what he meant. I lived alone, but they kept insisting we needed a family meeting first. My phone had been destroyed in the accident. I'd been borrowing their phones to check emails. My kids were weirdly protective about their phones, though. Sutton would hover nearby. Kellen would watch over my shoulder. I chalked it up to them being worried. They kept asking strange questions. Kellen asked if I'd updated my will recently. Sutton asked about my retirement accounts. Pierce wanted to know about my house insurance. When I asked why, they'd say they were making sure everything was in order in case something happened again. That made sense. I'd almost died, but it still felt weird. The day before I got released, all 3 showed up together. They said I should come stay with one of them instead of going home alone. I said I'd be fine at my house. They pushed back hard. Sutton said, "What if something happens and you're alone?" I told them I appreciated it, but I wanted my own space. They looked at each other with expressions I couldn't read. A week after I got home, I invited them over for dinner. I was making pasta when I realized I'd left my reading glasses in my car. I asked Sutton if I could use her phone to turn on my car's flashlight app. She hesitated, then handed it over. I went outside. I couldn't find my glasses. While I was looking, a text notification popped up on Sutton's phone from Kellen in a group chat. Is he asking questions? I stared at the screen. That was strange. I opened the group chat. My hand started shaking as I scrolled up. The messages went back weeks during my coma. "We need to make the decision soon. I told the funeral home we'd confirm by Friday." I kept scrolling. My heart was pounding. Kellen had written, "I can't keep taking time off work. We need to just do it." Pierce responded, "I already used his credit card to pay off my car. We need this to happen." Sutton wrote, "The lawyer said we can start dividing assets once we get the death certificate." I felt sick. There were messages about my belongings. Pierce wanted my truck. Kellen called dibs on my tools. Sutton had listed my boat for sale. They were discussing whether to sell my house or rent it out. Then I found the messages about life support. Kellen wrote, "How much longer do we have to wait?" Sutton responded, "Dr. Kim said we can make the decision. They're waiting for us to give permission to pull the plug." Pierce said, "Let's do it this week." I told my credit card company I'd have the money. I walked back inside holding Sutton's phone. All 3 were in the kitchen laughing. They went quiet when they saw my face. I held up the phone. I said, "What is this?" Sutton's face went white. She said, "What are you talking about?" I read out loud, "I can't keep taking time off work. We need to just do it." Kellen stood up fast. I kept reading. "I already used his credit card to pay off my car. We need this to happen." Pierce said, "Dad, the doctors told us you weren't going to wake up." I said, "You were planning my funeral while I was alive. You sold my boat. You used my credit card." Sutton started crying. She said, "The doctor said there was no hope." I pulled up more messages. "Dr. Kim said we can make the decision. They're waiting for us to give permission to pull the plug." Kellen said, "We were following medical advice." I said, "Dr. Kim told me you were calling her multiple times a day asking when you could remove life support, weeks before she suggested it." The room went silent. I looked at each of them. I said, "How long has this been fake? The weekly dinners before my accident? The phone calls? Were you just waiting for me to die?" I changed my will the next week and left everything to the nurses who actually wanted me to live.